Planet Dolan.
From admitting to having a stomach fetish to collecting strands of hair, the Planet Dolan crew reenact some of the best true stories from Reddit about the creepiest things men have ever done to women. I'm Cookie, and today I'll be your narrator. This story was submitted by Kopitapa. In college, there was a socially awkward guy who often sat next to Spincess during Spanish class. Thinking that he could use a friend, Spincess decided to start talking to him. He never brought any writing utensils to class, so he always asked her if she could lend him a pen. At first, it wasn't a big deal, until it got to the point where she had lent him about 12 pens. Irritated, she said, "Hey man, this isn't cool. I'd like to have my pens back." The guy apologized and brought all of them back to her the next day. They were in working condition and not even chewed. Sometime later, the guy's doormate sought out Spincess and told her to throw away the pens that she had lent the guy. It turned out that he had walked in as the guy was sticking the pens up his ass while moaning Spincess's name. From then on, she never again lent a pen to anyone. This story was submitted by GotAReddit. Goobie once knew a guy who was a singer in a local band. One night, after he got off stage, she began talking to him. During the conversation, she mentioned that she had just celebrated her 18th birthday. Days later, he texted her, asking her if he could call her. She said he could, so he called. He asked her weirdly sexual questions such as, "What if I wanted you to call me master?" and "I want to tie you up and leave you like that all day." Does that sound perfect? Uncomfortable, Goobie mentioned that she had a boyfriend. However, he asked, "But are you gonna marry him? It's not like it's gonna last." Goobie ended the conversation and avoided answering any of his calls or replying to his texts. This story was submitted by ThotThotleyTheMeek. Paprika once met a guy who she thought was pretty cool. After talking for a while, they had made plans to get together again. When they met up again, everything was normal during the first hour. Then, while walking through the park, he asked Paprika if he could touch her stomach. Before she could answer, he began to rub it. He then asked her if she would like to rub his stomach. She told him that she was uncomfortable, and he apologized. Then, out of nowhere, he took out his phone that literally had hundreds of photos of scantily clad women. He zoomed in on the stomach of one of the women and said how soft her stomach looked, before putting his hand back on Paprika's stomach. He told her that she should start exercising so her stomach would be more like the models in the picture. After that, she called it a night and only met up with him one other time to help him study for an exam. Other than that, Paprika kept her distance. This story was submitted by Wacky Detective. An old man who lived in Tolop's building was sitting behind her on the bus one day. During the ride, she felt a little pinch. Tolop turned around and saw that the man was collecting strands of her hair. She asked him what the fuck he thought he was doing. He didn't answer, and once she got back to her place, she told her brother about what happened. Since that day, the man never looked at Tolop or her hair ever again. This story was submitted by singletracks. After a few months of dating a socially awkward man, Snoopy decided to break up with him. After the breakup, he began to stalk her. He broke into her house and put a tracker on her car. He even listened to her private phone conversations. While she had evidence of him breaking into her house only once, she's fairly certain that he broke in on multiple occasions. She was so scared of him that she temporarily lived with a friend of hers. Snoopy ended up getting a restraining order, and since then, she never saw him again. This story was submitted by bootynipple. What? Melissa met a guy online who lived in a different country. Everything went fine at first, with them talking a lot, although Melissa wasn't too interested in conversation. At the time, she was very busy with school and her job. Soon enough, he became enamored with her. He always talked about being lonely, and that she was different from most girls and was mature for her age despite only being a teenager. Melissa began to not talk to him as much, which was when he began writing her long messages where he said things like,
If you don't want to talk, just tell me and I'll leave. I'm used to being treated this way anyway.
He would also go on and on about how amazing she was. The creepiest thing he did was count the hours and minutes that she was away, as well as the hours and minutes they talked. He said things like, "We talked for 4 hours and 3 minutes last Saturday, and it was the most amazing conversation I've had in a while. And it's been 2 days, 14 hours, and 27 minutes since we last talked. Where are you?
I missed you."
It got to the point where Melissa told him that he was weird and obsessed before blocking him. This story was submitted by Ellehem. When she was 16, Pecan went to a water park with her family, but got separated from them shortly after arriving. As she was floating along the lazy river in a tube, a group of creepy men tried talking to her. She pretended to only speak another language until one of the employees took pity on her and pushed her tube away while having a talk with the other men. While continuing to go down the lazy river, an older guy floated along 5 minutes later. He started talking to her and wouldn't leave her alone. She decided to climb out of the lazy river to look for her family. As she was starting to get freaked out, Pecan glanced behind her and noticed that the older guy was following her. She began to walk a little faster, frantically looking for either a member of her family or an employee. Pecan finally found an employee, which was when the older guy ran away faster than she could turn her head. She burst out crying because she knew something bad would have happened if she hadn't found that employee at the time. It was supposed to be a fun day that turned out to be a nightmare. This story was submitted by Ravenclawpoetry. In high school, Ramona had a very quiet but nice guy sit behind her on the bus. They talked every now and then. One day, he showed up at her job and wouldn't leave. He then asked her out, but Ramona gently declined. However, he didn't register her response. Instead, he continued to ask her out. He just kept talking her ear off and, in general, being a creep. Ramona's boss finally asked him to leave, but the guy said, "That's alright, I'll just be waiting by her car." Then her boss threatened to call the police, and that made him leave. Her co-workers knew how terrified Ramona was of the guy, so they walked her out to her car for several nights in case he was, indeed, waiting by her car. This story was submitted by gfypxdez. One day, Mimi was riding in the back row of a bus. A guy dressed in a business suit and carrying a briefcase walked on and sat on one of the seats next to her. While looking out the window, from out of the corner of her eye, Mimi saw that the guy was looking at her like a fucking predator and jacking off. She got so scared that she ran off the bus at the next stop and called her mum to get her. Her mum told her that if that ever happened again, to go up to the bus driver and tell him. She went on to tell Mimi that if the guy had followed her off the bus, she would have been alone with him in the middle of nowhere. A thought that had never occurred to her, and gives her the creeps even to this day. This story was submitted by whtamidoinlol. During her last year of school, Ladybot walked to the car park where her mum was going to pick her up. While walking across the field, a bunch of guys shouted at her to "Get her tits out!" She then heard one of them say, "Oh shit, she's wearing a school uniform!" Ladybot walked as fast as she could to the car park where she got into her mum's car. She was very ashamed about what had happened. Huge thanks for the folks over on our Planet Dolan subreddit for submitting their stories. We have another question for you. What was the biggest favor a stranger ever did for you? Let us know in the Reddit page linked below, and you might be featured in a future countdown. This is Cookie, signing off. Goodbye!